Hi, and welcome to Less Chatter, More Matter, a podcast about all things communication without the waffle. I'm your host, Mel Loy, and in this show, I will give you short, punchy, practical communication tips and insights you can start using in your communication practices right away. I'm a former corporate communication executive who happily took a redundancy, started my own business, and never looked back. These days, I use my 20 plus years of experience to help guide organisations of all shapes and sizes in how to communicate more effectively. I'm wife to Michael, cat mum to Cookie, auntie to 12 nieces and nephews, a yoga teacher and a group fitness fanatic. I promise these episodes will always be short, sharp and helpful, so let's get amongst it. By 2025, it's estimated that the volume of data or information created, captured, copied, and consumed worldwide will reach 181 zettabytes. If you're not sure what zettabytes are, well, 181 zettabytes is the equivalent of 4.98 quintillion movies. To put that into other terms, if each one of those movies was a DVD and you stacked them on top of each other, that stack of DVDs would be 747 trillion kilometers high, or roughly 78 times the diameter of the Milky Way. Why does this matter? Because as communications professionals, data surrounds us everywhere we look, and it is a critical tool to make sure our work is the most effective it can be. And that is what today's episode is all about. Hello, and welcome to Less Chatter, More Matter, the Communications Podcast. I'm your host, Mel Loy, and on today's episode, I am delighted to bring you an interview with someone who might seem a bit unconventional for a comms podcast. I'm speaking with a data geek. My guest today, Roelant Vos, has been a consultant, trainer, software vendor, and decision maker in the corporate world. And over the years, Roelant has observed data management from many different points of view. Throughout his career, the common theme has always been a passion for data automation and code generation, finding and using repeatable patterns to interpret data. Roelant has always felt that this is the key to making data solutions easier, more manageable, and truly flexible. And he is currently writing a book about these topics called Data Engine Thinking, and has started a new company, Agnostic Data Labs, that provides tools that can help implement data solutions using these ideas. In this interview, I asked Roelant to give us the 101 in plain English on what data is, where to find it, and how we can be using it as comms professionals. He also shared some of the challenges with using data that we need to be on the lookout for, and some simple ways to use AI tools like Gemini or ChatGPT to help us get the information we need from data without bugging the IT team. And if you're still wondering if this is for you, well, if you want to remain relevant as a comms pro, then you need to know where you can find data, how you can make sense of it, and how to use it to your advantage. This is what is going to start setting you apart from the rest of the pack as we enter this new AI-driven phase of our profession. So don't get left behind. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this chat with the wonderful Roelant Vos. Roelant, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Hi, Mel.
Hello. So you're joining us all the way from where today?
It's actually local in Brisbane.
Oh,
Brisbane
amazing.
today, so not as warm as I was hoping it would be, but yeah, it's nice.
And where do you hail from originally?
The Netherlands.
Beautiful. The home of poppies, I believe.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about you. What do you do? How did you come to develop your expertise in this space?
Yeah, well, it sounds a little bit cliche maybe, but as a kid, I was really drawn into computers and gaming and coding and taking computers apart, assembling them again. So, for example, as a kid, I would take a notebook, like a paper notebook, and then write code so I can later key it into the computer. So really, really drawn in at a young age. So it's no surprise that at some point I started studying computer science in the late 90s, and it had a really small subject about data, and interestingly, it still is to this day that the focus on data is relatively small in the computer science world. But what I did learn there, I really liked, because there were techniques and concepts that really focus on how can you take something like data and organizing in such a way that it's just a bit easier to handle. For example, a process like normalization, which is really an algorithm to structure data efficiently. And I really like this idea and the design, and yeah, I wanted to do that, and I did.
So what do you do now with data?
I am mostly focused on, I guess, the term data management in general, which is a very broad principle of how within a company or within an organization or context, how we define a data element, where is it coming from, who should be worried about it, how is it used, how can we combine it with other bits of data to draw meaning from it. And it really means that we have to find people that worry about it, right? So we need people that own it, and then we need to make sure that all the processes and the systems around it generate it in the way that it's really useful. So it's like this morphing of the company to make the, I guess, the data that is generated work for them.
Gotcha. So let's go back to basics maybe. What is data in terms of when we think about a company like the ones that you work with, where do they find it?
Yeah, that's always such a hard question to answer about. So the way I look at data, I always call data the breadcrumbs of human activity, and it's something that is created as a result of something happening, right? There's a business process, there's an event, there's a transaction, there's something happens, and data is created as a byproduct, more or less, and that lands somewhere. And then we need to dig it up to find it and do something with it. The way I explain this is to compare this to the work that biologists and paleontologists do, for example. So imagine you're digging in the earth, trying to find fossils. You've got all these different layers of the earth, and you find a fossil, and you think, is this a thigh bone? Is this a giant tooth? Is this a little pinky of an even bigger dinosaur? You're like, well, based on what I know, I can probably say it looks a bit like this. And then you dig further and you find more, and slowly but surely this picture starts to emerge of this dinosaur you're looking for. And
I love that analogy.
Combining these different disciplines and different perspectives, they form an understanding of your reality over time. And you have to go back and challenge earlier assumptions and change your views on what you think your dinosaur looked like. And I think it's fascinating because consider how often the tree of life has changed as a result of genetics and research. And data is exactly that, right? You dig it up, you find it, and you're like, that's just stuff. I don't know what it is. I got no idea. And then you find more and more, you talk to people, and you try to trace back where it's created from, which process does what, and this context. That's what gives it its meaning, and that's what makes it useful. So the data is the undisputable fact that something happened. And once you understand why and how and what made it happen, then it becomes something that you can use.
I love that analogy of the dinosaurs, and yes, does make a lot of sense. And from my own perspective of working in corporates for years, there was a lot of data that came through from customers, for example, and their activity online, and their activity in stores, but even employees as well. Is that kind of the data you're talking about as well, like all that sort of information that we store and on all sorts of systems in a workplace?
That's right. Yep. And it's and this analogy sort of works there as well, because you get what's recorded, but it might not be the full picture, and it might not be the complete data that you get. But yeah, if a customer enters the website, it leaves tiny breadcrumbs, and we collect those as data points.
And it's challenge too, isn't it? Because sometimes we make assumptions based on that data. We put 2 and 2 together and end up with 16. So
yep.
How do you know that you're, I guess, getting the right story out of what you're seeing?
I always look at it as something it's an assumption at a point in time that will change. So what you do with data is you collect those events, those facts, those breadcrumbs, and then you apply a model on it. You say, based on what I know, this is what meaning I can derive from it. And that model, and a data model is a very commonly used term in this space, right? It's like your interpretation, your perspective on the information that you've collected. So you start with an assumption, and then you say, it sort of worked, or it doesn't work, or like we're not really sure. So we need to go back to the infrastructure, the IT environment, and say, can you collect us more, please? Because without more of these breadcrumbs, we can't really make a correct assumption, or we're not really certain that we derive the right meaning from it.
So a bit of to and fro by the sounds of things.
Yeah, it's a process.
Yeah. So why should communicators like myself, like PR professionals, internal comms teams, government relations teams, media professionals, why should we care about data?
So data is in the news quite a bit. So I think as a society and everybody, we hear a lot of big data, AI analytics, and things, and opportunities that it gives, and the way it changes people's lives, and that's all relevant and that's all true. It obviously needs lots of data, and there's plenty of data to go around. But I think the real value for everybody, and communication specialists in particular, is that what the data says at the basic level, it's the livelihood of the company. So you can argue about how to interpret certain things, but you can't dispute that something happened. And I think going back to that starting point is important for communication, because once you roll out these different interpretations, you can always go back to the facts if you have them. And I think there's a lot of value for communication specialists to appreciate that difference and to craft your message around what perspective you take on the events that have happened, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. It's almost like, I guess the evidence or the measurement that can help you go, okay, well, we should be targeting our communication more towards, for example, this particular audience at this particular time, or that particular piece of communication didn't resonate well, and we can tell that because of X, Y, Z, whatever we got back. What are some of the challenges, though, with accessing and using data to inform communication?
The issues in general with data are often referred to as this container term data quality issues, and it can be varied. And the biggest issues is that it's sparse, so you don't have enough steps of the process to really follow it. Mm-hmm. So for example, you can say, a customer entered my website and looked at this product and bought it, but it might not do that for every customer, or it might not do it consistently, or it might not capture the steps where the customer was looking at 20 other products, because the systems need to be geared for that. So you always have this initial collection of data that might just not be complete enough to draw meaning from it. So it goes back to understanding the process and then saying, hey, if this is what we want to do, then we need to capture these events as well. And that's the biggest problem, because that means you have to go back to IT and back to the business and let's just change our systems and change our way of working, and because then I can really report on this campaign. Right?
And my stuff is the most important right now.
Exactly.
Prioritize needs.
So
yeah, that's huge.
That's a big challenge. So, and then of course you've got the technical barriers and the semantic differences, because everybody has different ways of explaining the same thing. So you need to align that. The thing you can do, though, is to be proactive in that and be very specific on what it is you're trying to do. So you have this objective that you want to achieve, right? So to optimize the campaign, to make sure that you test out different versions of the same text to make sure which one works best, all those kinds of things, and then be very precise on what is the data I need for this, what are the data points, what do they mean specifically, and then you can influence the process to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. And on that, one of the challenges that we actually talked about this on a podcast episode a few weeks ago is how you take data, complexity, ideas, and make it meaningful for your audience. So you might be collecting all this data and facts and putting it together, but how do you actually communicate that in a way that makes sense to Joe Bloggs, who has never had to deal with data or numbers before? How would you recommend going about that?
Yeah, look, one of the things that is important in working with data is the visualization. So it's about collating or aggregating that information into a meaningful key figure or statistic or diagram and things like that. It's not really my strong suit. I'm always sort of focused and drawn towards the technical backend. But there's a whole science around how to convey complexity in relatively straightforward terms, right? And I know people that are really, really good at that. So it's visualization. So it's creating the right type of chart for the audience, and things like that.
Yeah, and I think you're right. The visualization is so critical. Being able to take complexity and a complex idea and a complex set of numbers and data and put that in a visual that people understand it's such a core skill of communication. And it can be, it's something you've really got to work on. I just want to ask you as well, what are you seeing in terms of the impact of AI on your world and how we collect data and then use it?
I really like it. It makes a lot of things so much easier. For example, if you have an Excel sheet and you say, just can you give me the summary of this value transposed against this other value and this particular angle that I want to look at, it does it all for you. If you say, write me some code in C or Python to create this algorithm that predicts the next purchase or whatever you want to do, it creates the code for you. It makes it a lot easier. It doesn't always do it well. It almost never does it correctly, but it gets you there like 80% of the way. So I think it makes the barrier to entry for anybody to get their hands dirty in the raw data. It lowered it. So I think there's a lot of value in that, because then it makes it possible for people without a hardcore technical background to achieve those results and have those conversations.
And obviously, a lot of the AI tools like ChatGPT and those sorts of things rely on data to be able to generate information back to people. So I see that kind of two-way street there. And you mentioned it's a good way to break down some barriers to entry for people. What are some simple ways that communication pros could get started with using data?
So I think that for most data analysis, some level of coding is required. So there is always this technical component, but it's also really easy to learn. And things like ChatGPT and Gemini makes it a lot easier too. So if you watch a YouTube video, play around things, for 2 hours, you can figure out how to access systems to collect data and to understand what processes are happening. And I think that's a really useful skill for anybody to have. Scripting, coding, those kinds of things, including for communication professionals. So the ability to automate some of your work and to go and collect some of the information without going to IT or data teams, that's super valuable. And they can try out what these different interpretations mean and think about what kind of message you want to convey with it. But,
Are there any tools you'd recommend?
For everybody.
Yeah. Are there any tools you would recommend in terms of for people to get started?
Yeah, if you want to go down that route, working with Python is probably the easiest, the lowest
And what's
barrier.
Python for those of us who
let's make the fair points. Python is a coding language, open source. You can download it for free, use it for free. It's very easy to get started with many examples of how to interpret the information. But I also appreciate it's not for everybody, right? So if it's not really your thing, a really good entry point is looking at some of the web analytics tools that are available. For example, Google Analytics and things like that. You've got free A/B testing environments where you can route or have similar process, follow different routes and compare which one is best. Used a lot in text communication, user experience, and those kinds of things. So you can set up your own demographics and work with that. But doing it yourself really gives you the appreciation of what it means. And I think that's ultimately the goal, right?
Yeah. And that A/B testing is so important for, I see it used for people for their websites, but even internally, especially if you've got quite big companies with a lot of people, being able to test ideas and systems and messaging with different groups of people is just invaluable. Otherwise you don't know what you don't know. So I love that idea. Now, you've recently written a book called Data Engine Thinking. Can you tell us a little bit about what that book is about?
Sure. Yep. Yeah, it's not fully done yet. It's almost done, but it definitely is done this year. we want it to be as fun to read as possible, spend a bit more time on the styling and the visuals
Love it.
and things like that. So because, data, it can be a bit of a dry topic. So we try to make it as not dry as we possibly can.
Thank you so much on behalf of everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, the whole world in desktop publishing and editorial things have opened up to me. But so I'm writing this with my long-term friend and fellow data guy, Dirk Lerner in Germany. And what it is it's about a framework you can apply to the data analysis and interpretation in a way that supports the iterative exploration and modeling of your data. So basically what I talked about with, you need to learn more and then challenge your opinion. So if you can define this as an automated thing and then run it, then you don't have to worry about the technical side as much, but you can really focus on the definitions and the talking and collecting the subject matter expertise, and then the result will be automatically generated for you. And it's that concept. And in parallel, I'm writing software that does that. So it takes a bit of focus away from the book, because writing software takes time. But at the very least, we can demonstrate that these concepts work, and we can run code to say, this is what it means to be able to do these kinds of things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, congratulations. Can't wait to see it, especially if it is going to be very visual. I'm a visual learner, so that's right up my alley.
That would be nice.
Now, I have 3 questions I ask everybody who comes on to the podcast. Are you ready for those?
Sure.
All right, let's do it. The first question is, what's one of the best communication lessons you've ever learned, and how did it change the way you approach communication?
So I really like Michelle Bauda's materials and trainings on persuasive presentations. So I went to this course, and it was one of the best things that I did training-wise, I think. And I really liked the way you can structure a message in very specific steps. Start with the icebreaker, leading with the decision or the statement you want to make, prepare for any bias, and then providing the arguments, all that whole framework around it, and then circling back to the key message. I use it for every presentation, right? So every time I do a presentation, that's the structure I follow. So that's probably my biggest learning.
Yeah, that's great. And that actually brings us back to one of our top tips is always have a structure. A structure is it's so helpful for the person who's trying to follow your chain of thought, but for you putting together the presentation or the email, whatever it is, to have a structure helps you logically flow through the information, and just makes it easier to write as well, to pull it together, I feel. What's one thing you wish people would do more of or less of when communicating?
So for me, it's so I spend a lot of time in meetings, sometimes all day. What I really like is when people, including myself, spend the time to prepare for these meetings really thoroughly, and then spending like maybe a couple of hours to write this decision-making paper and figure out the protocols, do their research, send it ahead, and then you can make these meetings or these catch-ups really, really efficient. And I really don't like the time when everybody comes together and just tries to figure it out, right? It's so much more efficient if you prepare this, send it ahead, and make sure that everybody actually read it when you meet up, right?
Yes,
so it's like more but you can start doing that, and it saves everybody time, and I really like that.
That's a great tip. And yes, I concur. Meetings are often the bane of my existence.
Yeah,
especially when they're just going in circles.
Right?
Yeah. So preparation is key. One last question. Who do you turn to for communication advice?
Yeah, it's pretty much everybody I worked with in the past. So many people have been so great and so friendly, and I know so many skilled communication specialists that I worked with, and I always stay friends with everybody and try to return the favor as much as possible as well. So if somebody if I need to look at some text, and I know a couple of people that are happy to do that. If I need to do a presentation, people can test it, and if I need to work on the software, I know people that do the UX for a living and then test it for me, and there's so much talent, and everybody's so friendly. So yeah,
That's it. It's reciprocity, right? And it
yeah,
talks to, you can't burn your bridges, and building really good relationships totally pays off in the long term. I've seen that firsthand just owning a business. So I totally agree.
yep.
Now, Roland, where can people find out more about you, connect with you, and learn more about what you do?
I've got a website, roelantvos.com, which has a blog that talks about all these concepts in a arguably a bit more technical detail, right? If you want to do this yourself, then there. But that's a really good starting point. And LinkedIn. So we're always keen to meet up with more like-minded individuals. So
Fantastic. Well, we'll pop the links in the show notes. Roland, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I've loved learning from you. It's certainly where's my appetite to go play with some data. So thank you very much. And thank you again for coming on the show.
yeah, thanks for having me.